And the phone number is who's that calling in on the phone line? Just curious.
I don't see it.
Oh, maybe that's Pat.
I was on, it's Pat Daly. I was on mute.
Hi, great. Thanks, Pat.
Good morning. Good morning.
Morning.
And we're live.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to MRC's Town Hall meeting. I'm Karen Fassell, President of the Board, and we appreciate your participation today. We are continuing to move forward with our prospective partnership with Revere Capital Advisors, LLC. And as part of that, we're working diligently on the many detailed legal documents associated with that prospective transaction, and Revere is continuing to work to secure their financing. We are excited about the progress we're making, and we feel like this is the best case scenario for MRC and its members in terms of getting the plant reopened and operating as it was designed. As part of the prospective agreements, there will be a few changes that will be required of MRC and its members. And as a result of that, it triggers what's called fundamental matters as part of MRC's bylaws. And so you've received the notice regarding that. This town hall is an opportunity for us to talk a little bit more about those changes, as well as the proposed arrangement as a whole, and provide an opportunity for you folks to ask questions and get further information about the prospective transaction. So this morning, we're going to start off hearing from our Executive Director, Mike Carroll, who's going to give us a little update on the plant and the work with Revere, and touch briefly on the fundamental matters. And then he'll hand it off to MRC's attorney, Jonathan Pottle, who will talk in more detail about those fundamental matters, what it means for folks as members, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. We do have the Q&A feature enabled, so if you have any questions at any point during the presentations, feel free to post those and we'll address them at the end once Mike and John are done with their remarks. Hi, Sophie, do you have a question?
I just wonder if it would work better for the board to turn off their cameras while we're having presentations so that the public can see better.
Sure, we can do that. Have the focus be right on Mike, just what he likes, right?
Thank you, Sophie.
All right, well, with that, Mike, I'll hand it off to you and you can give a little overview for our members.
Thank you, Karen. As most everyone is aware, with the court's approval, MRC purchased the Hamden facility on August 10th of this year from the bondholders and created a new company, Municipal Waste Solutions, MWS, as the new owner and identity of the Hamden facility. MWS is an LLC that is currently owned and operated by the MRC. Purchase price for the plant was $1.5 million minus any credits of specific costs MRC acquired during the final sale process. MRC worked with the current lien holders in settlement terms and payment plans until the next round of financing comes to fruition to pay those debts off. After 2 long years of uncertainty, we are excited to take complete control and make timely decisions on the plant. We, the MRC and its members, are finally in the driver's seat. Under our ownership, we have accomplished more in the last 2 months towards the reopening than the bondholders did in the last 2 years. In late July, once we knew MRC would end up with the plant, we started working more in depth with Revere Capital Advisors, LLC. Revere Capital won exclusivity with their partnership proposal presented to the MRC. Revere Capital was given 60 days exclusivity, which ended September 26, to complete due diligence and finalize a partnership agreement and a closing. Since the 26th, Revere has requested more time. Revere needs the additional time to work with facility operators and project managers on details of financial and operating plan to implement profit improvement programs and biogas upgrades to restart the MSW facility and operate it profitably. MRC's board did vote a few weeks ago to accept the proposed terms negotiated with Revere Capital Advisors for additional time needed, with the expectation of a financial closing on or before November 10th of this year. MRC then executed a term sheet with Revere. This agreement will extend the exclusivity period an additional 45 days to November 10th to allow Revere to complete due diligence and do legal documentations for its investment in Municipal Waste Solutions, LLC. The executed term sheet specifies that Revere will acquire a controlling interest in the Municipal Waste Solutions, LLC, with the MRC retaining a minority ownership. As the majority owner, Revere will supply the financial capital needed to reopen MWS, while the MRC's minority stake will provide it with a seat at the table. MRC will continue to own the land beneath the facility and receive lease payments. MRC will also receive a per ton fee for providing certain management services to the plant and Municipal Waste Solutions, which will help MRC recoup money spent during the plant closure. We are encouraged by Revere's continuing interest in the project and significant efforts to bring it to completion in over the next several weeks. Revere expects to complete its due diligence this far. We are very pleased with the reporting and the expertise Revere has brought on site, reviewing the plant's equipment and technology and operation. Revere intends to operate the plant as it was designed to operate, which includes significant improvements and efficiencies to that operation. With all that said, it brings us to fundamental matters, which is one of the reasons why we are here today. MRC sent notices to members on September 29th detailing these fundamental matters. The proposed terms with Revere included the following 4 fundamental matters. 1 and 2 are more or less the same. Resetting the clock on the master waste supply agreement and the site lease to a 15-year term. This allows Revere much more flexibility with their financing and their profitability. Number 3, MRC, as the owner of MWS, which is considered an MRC asset, MRC is selling a stake in that asset valued at over $100,000, requires members' notice. Number 4, rebates formula and terminology will change in the waste agreement to profit sharing, meaning the current agreement references rebates, and now that MRC is an owner, it will need to reference profits. That's all I have for now. I want to thank all the members again for all their patience and encourage you to ask questions once we get to the Q&A portion of this meeting. Please remember, I'm always available to answer any questions if you give me a call. I will turn it over to Jonathan Pottle, MRC's legal counsel, just to give us a brief explanation of the fundamental matters, and then back to Karen to see if any other board members have anything to add before we start the Q&A. Thank you again.
Great, thank you, Mike. I thought that was a very helpful overview and summary of the fundamental matters, the 4 ones that you just identified. As Mike mentioned, those are so-called fundamental matters under the MRC bylaws. The quick recap: an extension of the term of the site lease, extension of the term of the master waste supply agreement, sale of an asset over $100,000. That's the joint venture, and a slight change in the rebate. Entitlement to rebate remains, but rather than based on the financial performance of the former coastal facility, which is essentially moot at this point, it'll be pegged to, as Mike mentioned, profit sharing cash distributions that would be due to MRC as a part owner of Municipal Waste Solutions. Under MRC bylaws, the first step is the board adopts or approves the actual action that would constitute the fundamental matters, those 4 items that I just mentioned. The board did that via a board resolution on September 26. Following that was the fundamental notice, which that board resolution was attached to, And that went out on September 29th to all members. And I know it's also available on the MRC website. And I believe there is also a constant contact message that went out as well. How the process works, I know members are probably familiar with it at this point, but just as a quick refresher, when the board does that authorization, and here I'll call it the recapitalization transaction for the Hamden facility, that triggers these fundamental matter notices. Those notices go out. They went out, as I mentioned, on September 29th. There's a 30-day time period where if the members wish to call a special meeting to vote on it, there's that opportunity to do so. You need at least 60,000 tons representative of the MRC members to do that. There's no requirement or mandate that occur. It's simply an opportunity to do that. If the 30 days goes by and there's not that request, then the board authorization that was adopted can then be implemented. Of course, if there is an election, we'll have the election and see if the board, if the vote is up, then it still would remain as an authorized action of MRC. So from the prior ones, we were following the same sequence or cadence where the notices went out. We have a town hall opportunity to field any questions, get any comments from members that are there that may have them. There has not been any elections called before. I think in part because of all the steps that we've been taking. But again, this is a great opportunity to ask any questions or get any comments. The 30 days will run as of October 29th, which is before that target November 10th date that Mike had just mentioned for a closing. And as you can tell, the timing is somewhat intentional because we want to make sure that MRC has completed all the steps on its end to make sure that the recapitalization transaction, which helps affect the reopening of the facility, can occur. There are a number of other items that were briefly mentioned in the fundamental notice memo that went out. There are, as mentioned, there'll be some amendments to the master waste supply agreement and the site lease that are not fundamental matters, but are still necessary. Many of those are just removing what I'll call legacy provisions, like references to the former owner Coastal and Fiberite. Also, there were provisions that relate to, call it pre-construction and construction items. Clearly, those are stale and no longer applicable going forward. And there's a few other ones as well, like removing some of the security obligations of MRC under the site lease. So there no longer will be a so-called cash collateral account required by MRC. So there's a number of amendments like those that are moving forward to help affect that transaction. As Mike mentioned, we are in the midst of pulling that all together, targeting November 10th to close. And as mentioned, here we are in this fundamental matter process. Again, a great opportunity to ask any questions or get any comments. But that is the process under the MRC bylaws, and look forward to helping answer any questions or comments that members may have.
Thanks, John. That was a great overview. And so I'll remind folks, feel free to enter questions in the Q&A feature. We have a few to get us started here, some good questions. The first question is, has Revere presented to the MRC written commitments or other evidences of the financing needed to restart the plant and install necessary improvements? And then sort of a follow-on question is, will the MRC close the sale of the plant to Revere without Revere presenting such evidence? And I'll just make a brief statement and then perhaps hand it over to Mike or George to talk a little bit more about this. But they have not presented the written commitment yet that we'll be requiring of them, but they will be required to provide proof of that commitment before we do close. But Mike or George or John, would you like to say anything further about that? I mean, from my perspective, it's important for MRC not to relinquish rights to the asset without a firm commitment that Revere is coming with the capital necessary to restart the plant and get it to profitability. So that is one of our focuses, foci. Mike?
So I read that question also as the necessary improvements. So we have received a written report of the necessary improvements and what the financial commitment would need to be on those improvements. So that we have received, and I looked at questions having that in there. So that part we have received from them. I just wanted to add that because it kind of looks like they were talking about obviously what we refer to as the PIP plan, the profit improvement plan.
And Michael, this is George, if I can just in, I would also say that what we've reviewed on a confidential basis is at a level of detail that is far beyond any other submittal that the MRC has received over the past 2 years. And that gives us a lot of comfort at the level of detail at which various plant components and subcomponents and even individual equipment is being reviewed and which costs are being compiled. So we do have information on, the question asked about the financing needed. So to the extent that we have had a great detail in terms of looking at the equipment, its condition, and the cost that would take to get that condition back into operation and the level of financing needed to get those costs, we are seeing, and we have seen more information from Revere. And just as a reminder, a lot of potential proposals have trooped through this plant in the last 2 years. And we've seen more information from Revere at a higher level of detail recently than we have, frankly, for many of those that went before them. And I think that gives us a lot of comfort.
George, can you speak to the type of evidence that will be requiring of Revere with regard to their access to the financing needed?
Yeah, okay. I mean, it comes in stages. You get an overall approach. Well, at some point there will be term sheets that lay out specific conditions. We do have a term sheet between the MRC and Revere that talks generally about about the types of conditions that, if they were found in due diligence, would require a little bit of extra effort or frankly, let's set a standard for what is foreseen and for what is not foreseen. And what's going on now is the next level of looking at that, of meeting those standards. So at the end of that standard, we'll see term sheets, the next level of conditions, the next level of response from financiers, and then it's somewhat of an iterate process. We all understand it ain't over till it's over, that until the money passes, it hasn't passed, and that you're getting an ever increasing amount of evidence as you go along. So I think we're going down that path. As Karen said, we need to get to the point where we have the evidence we need before there's actually a closing that involves transfer of control.
Thanks, George. So some more questions. If the sale does not close by November 10th, will exclusivity to Revere be extended? If extended one more time, will the MRC require Revere to post a down payment? So our focus is on November 10th and a closing by November 10th. However, if that's not able to happen, as long as we're seeing good progress by Revere in its arrangements, there is a possibility we might consider an extension. However, the terms of the extension that we provided to them on September 26th require that they provide a down payment. The dollar amount has not been specified, but they will be required to make a financial commitment to receive any extension beyond November 10th. And there was another question about when Revere was originally granted exclusivity in late July, were they required to make a payment? And they were. That amount was $250,000, which MRC now has, since they weren't able to close by September 26th, which was that original exclusivity agreement. And then the question, why is the situation that MRC finds itself in with Revere any different than the bondholders found themselves in with Delta Thermal Energy, two prospective buyers who cannot raise the financing? And just to echo what George alluded to, which is the fact that the folks from Revere and the technicians and folks that they brought in to pursue the due diligence, conduct the engineering review, have been extremely serious, the most qualified bunch of folks that we've dealt with. And they've expended an incredible amount of time and effort and money bringing this project to the potential close on November 10th. So I'll let Mike talk a little bit more about that because he's been working with these folks daily, so he can really speak to this issue, and their level of commitment and sincerity.
Yeah, it's been real. We have real stuff. A real deposit was given. We're seeing real paperwork. We've seen they've actually brought in some of their financiers to tour the facility. And the expertise that have come in, we've seen engineers, we've seen people that are expert in controls, and we've seen pulp experts. So those are all things that we didn't see before. We're kind of the gatekeeper this time, and we're just seeing real evidence, and we're seeing real engagement on this. So that's the major difference that right there.
Thanks, Mike. Another question, under these new arrangements, when does the contract with the towns begin and end?
I can answer that, Karen. So our new term sheet says that the plant will be up and going. The MRF end of it will be 8 to 10 months of acquisition. The WEN end of it will be 10 to 12 months of acquisition. What that means is when the plant's fully operating in that time, that would mean that it met commercial operations, and the term would start when it reaches commercial operations. So a general number would be 10 months from acquisition, and then that term resets at 15 years. And we're hoping to see acquisition happen on November 10th. So that would put you to November of 2023. So around the November, December time of 2023, the 15-year term would begin.
And just to clarify, is commercial operations require both the front end and the back end to be at commercial operations?
I don't know that, George. I think we'd have to see where the volume was going through the back end. Like when we hit commercial operations last time, we were operating the back end, but we had a bottleneck and some things that had to be fixed.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually a detail we're still working on. I think that there's certain things set forth in the term sheet. We need to take another detailed look at it. To some extent, it depends on how much diversion is happening from front end. And so, we're still doing the work.
I think it's important to remember too that one of the things that we focused on was keeping the rate for the members. And so one thing about extending the term is, there's more time with that rate. The members have a locked in waste rate for that term of that contract with the annual CPI. So that was something that we've worked very hard to make sure that we kept in these agreements, and that has not changed, and that will stay the same in the new agreement.
Great. Regarding profits versus rebates, does this mean that when the plant is not profitable, towns will not be receiving any financial returns? George?
Sure. Okay. So I mean, first of all, remember there are two cash flows here. There's cash flow out of the plant to the MRC, and then the joining members had authorized the MRC to manage the rebates derived from revenue sharing on their behalf, so that there's a second cash flow from the MRC to the joining members. Obviously, the second one's going to depend on the first one. If the facility is not generating cash, it's going to be hard for the MRC to have anything to distribute. It will depend on circumstances at the time. So, generally, that's the case. And under individual circumstances, if there's a period of profitability and then a downturn, the MRC may set up reserve funds as it has in the past to level out what's happening, but all that's ahead. That's for future boards to decide when the circumstances present themselves. So, generally that's going to be the case. Specific circumstances, there may be something different going on.
Thanks. A question about how minor is MRC's portion? What percentage, what kind of voting power will MRC have? Who'd like to take that?
I think do the NDAs. I'd like to refer to John on that and make sure that we're, I can't remember if those were in fundamental matters or not.
Yeah, I can briefly answer that. So I know in the fundamental matter memo that went out, it was identified that this review committee and members would be retaining 5% ownership interest. Some of the details that have yet to be finalized will be all the various voting rights and all the various items. But conceptually, I know that we've had discussions on identifying kind of significant or material items where, as part of oversight of the facility, MRC would have a voice, and it kind of harkens back, not exactly the same, but somewhat similar to MRC's role in part owner of the PERC facility. So it's something that is familiar territory for the MRC and its members. Obviously not an apples to apples comparison, but it'd be something similar in terms of that structure and framework.
I would like to add that we did negotiate in our current term sheet that our vote sitting on the board is much higher percentage than our percentage of the ownership.
Yeah, and I'm going to also add in here that the starting place was going back to actually exactly the voting arrangement we had with PERC. So we have learned a lot from that experience in what matters tend to come up in oversight and what issues are the types of things that the MRC needs to take or have specific powers on. The difference is that the MRC is also the landowner, so it has a site lease, and as well as having a master waste supply agreement, which is a slightly different position when the PERC facility had individual contracts with waste disposal agreements, which had common elements, but there was no master waste supply agreement. So it's a little bit different terrain because where there are contractual rights, the MRC may have remedies other than ownership to control how the facility is operated. And we're looking at a mix that gives the MRC what it needs and what it needs based on experience with a lot of issues over 30 years working with PERC, and yet is still going to retain certain contractual rights that are acceptable and are consistent with what lenders and or investors may require. So we're doing some tweaking to make that work, and that's in the process as well. That'll be reflected in the operating agreement as we go forward, and a few other agreements.
Thanks, George. And I think it's also worthwhile to point out and remind folks, I think we've mentioned this before, that as part of this arrangement, MRC would be taking on some administrative duties associated with the operation of the plant, like billing and relations with members and things like that. It will be receiving a fee for that work that it's providing, but also importantly, it will actually have a physical presence at the facility. So we'll have sort of boots on the ground, eyes on the ground. While not in an operating role, at least there'll be an MRC employee who will be at the facility pretty much, at least during business hours. So. All right. Any other questions from folks? We're happy to let you speak your question. If you'd prefer not to write it, you can raise your hand. And
Karen,
yes,
I didn't know if Nigel would like an opportunity to just present to the members of we talked a lot about, you know, what we've just accomplished on the 26th until the 10th, and just maybe provide us with a brief update and some of the things that they're currently working on.
I think that would be great. You'd be comfortable with that, Nigel or Pat?
They're not aware I was going to do that, so probably.
Nigel, we can see, hopefully, that might be helpful.
Yeah, Karen, I'm here. And Pat is on as well, I think, on his phone. What I would say is I would echo all of the commentary that we're in agreement with everything you just described in terms of the status of the process and the next steps. Yeah, no, we have been working very closely with Mike and with George, and it was great for Pat and I to see again many of the board members in Bangor last week at the MMA. So yeah, we're making good progress. We're continuing this process in earnest to try and conclude it by November 10th. And sort of your descriptions of this process, I think, are accurate. So all good from our side. I guess, Pat, if you have anything to add to that, but that's the primary impression I'd want you to have, that yeah, we're working in earnest on concluding this process.
No, it's Pat Daly. I'd echo everything you said, Nigel. The MRC's been, and its advisor, George Aronson, have been incredibly professional and thorough. This is as complicated situation as we've worked on in our tenure, and we're all from our team, a pretty experienced group of folks. We think this is very important for a lot of different reasons, not only the financial but also as an important step in terms of addressing complex waste solutions, not only in Maine, but literally around the world. And we've had a level of thoroughness and detail that's required of a financing such as this, or I should say, with our different investment partners, because there are three parts to it in terms of the MRF, the pulper, and the biogas complex. And we're trying to do this all within the context, as Mike said, of getting as quickly started as possible, because it is an important waste solution for the MRC member community. So it's a very iterative process in terms of demonstrating to not only our commitment committee and our partners that it's a viable opportunity, but also that we can execute. And the one thing I would say, and I understand the sensitivity on this, is we have no interest in buying this asset if we're not confident that we can get it financed and operational. It's not what we do. We are driven by success, and we think that the solution provided by this asset to be able to divert a large amount of municipal waste into recyclable products is an important inflection point in the waste industry, especially given right now that so many of the alternatives to landfills are shut down and bypassed. And I believe a lot more is going into landfills in Maine than people anticipated at this time.
That is great. Thank you. While we both have you there, one of the questions from one of our members, I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about where you're at, is will closing occur without an operator being named? Can you tell us where you're at with your operator and give us kind of a general overview on that?
Yeah, well, I'll jump in there. We're constrained a little bit by non-disclosure requirements. However, we have an agreement in principle with an operator who the MRC knows, and I believe the MRC respects. It's one of the top 4 operators of MRFs in the United States, mentioned within the same breath as Waste Management and Republic Services, who are 2 top-notch waste firms, and we have an agreement in principle for them to operate. They are involved in the process that we're doing right now in terms of, given that they're going to operate them, we want their input in terms of the technical changes that the technical modifications or refinements, not changes, refinements that will go in to upgrading some of the equipment. And given that they'll be operator, they're involved in those discussions now. But they are a top 4 in the United States operator of MRFs. And we should be able to disclose that name, very shortly. We're just working out details, the contractual details.
Super. And do you feel you'll be able to announce the name of that operator prior to the closing?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we wouldn't, I mean, obviously, it's very important because, you know, this asset's gonna take in a lot of throughput. And you'll need all the pieces together before you can move forward. And they're very well regarded. And they'll be an important part of the team because once this gets open, it's gonna run.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Another question, how much money does the MRC have left?
So our business meeting is actually, I mean, we provide our reports every quarter right on the website. That's all being gone through. Our business meeting is actually 2 weeks from now. So all that information will be available right on the website. I mean, that's something that we're very transparent on. So that will be right in our quarterly report.
Right, and the previous quarter's report is on the MRC website under accounting documents, I believe it's called.
Yes.
All right, another question. What are the major risks to the restart operation to be mitigated at this point? What do you think? George, Mike?
Oh, I wasn't sure if that's for us or that's for Revere.
I don't know. I think it's kind of a global question. I mean, you know, as Pat said, I mean, it's a very complex project that we're undertaking too. I mean, the facility itself is complex. The restart of it is complex. So, you know,
I will share, I think that we're doing it right. You know, this plant is most of the equipment is off the shelf. So when we were involved and took on the ownership, we started dealing with CP manufacturing. We've turned that over to Revere. CP manufacturing is pretty much all the equipment on the MRF. They're on board. Once we're ready to come in, assess all the equipment, make sure everything's still turning, assess what is on the shelf for parts. And then after that first visit, they'll replenish the inventory. They'll know what the MRF side of things need. Then they'll bring a team back right after that to implement any of those parts or those improvements that are needed, do any warranty work, and start training staff. So we have the experts on the MRF all ready to go, the ones who built the MRF. And then Revere has their own wet end or pulp folks for experts. So we really have the A team going in on this. Somebody that's going to be experienced with both sides of things. So I think one of the biggest risk at this point is we do have a profit improvement plan all ready to go. We know what the plant needs. And we've put a timeline on when we feel we can get the plant operational again. But supply and demand right now is, you know, we might tear into something and find that widget or that piece that has to come from a third world country that might be 6 months out. We're hoping not to find that. And we know that there's going to be machine opportunities and machine shops and that type of thing. But I think the biggest risk at this point is we got to get folks in there and we got to get things turned and just make sure that we can get everything in a timely manner that's needed to restart the plant.
Yeah, Mike, what I'll add to that is that I really, at Revere, what we're really focused on is timing and integration, right? That it's a complicated process. The timing is, you know, you can't restart the wet end without having the MRF operating in adequate tonnage. And then integrating that with the upgrade of the biogas. So as you described, there's a timing process to actually get the front end open, processing trash, and creating the pulping material. So that like getting that complicated process started on time. We don't want to wait too long because it actually costs money, right, in the bypass phase. So there's a bit of a balance between opening it too early and waiting for everything to be in place. What I would distinguish is the major risk would be sort of operating it too early and not having it work again. But we are not waiting for sort of every aspect of the plant to be operational before we reopen it and start processing the trash. And what I mean by that is the upgrade of the biogas, which will permit us to sell the renewable natural gas. That's likely to take longer in terms of completing the upgrade than when we reopen the plant. So as you properly characterize, we can get the plant reopened and processing trash likely within 8 to 10 months, but we won't be producing biogas probably for a year. So that's more like 10 to 12 months. So it's really the biggest risk is that getting this timing right and integrating the process of the reopening. It's a very complicated, multifaceted process.
Thanks, Nigel. All right. Anything, any other questions out there? Does anybody on the board want to say anything? I saw Sophie had her hand up, but it might have been a misfire.
I did. I was wondering if we could go back to the question about how much money we have. Well, technically a sound answer. I'm just a little bit concerned that it makes it seem like we don't know how much we have. And George, I know from my conversations with George, he knows and can answer that question very quickly.
Okay, Sophie, as of September 30th, the total assets of the MRC were $5.352 million unaudited. Liabilities, and again, we track this very carefully. There are about 500,000 payables outstanding as of that date in terms of bypass disposal. There were certain other payables. The net position was in the range of 4.2 million as of October 1st, 2022, and we'll give you more detail when the asset management report is given at the monthly meeting, but that's a little preview. So yeah, we're tracking cash closely. We've had to, we're in a new position. So of course the financials involve some slightly different line items on both the balance sheet and the statements of government funds, resources, revenues, and expenditures. So we're going through that process now. So we'll give a full report at the board meeting at the 27th. But yeah, we know.
Thanks, George. And thanks, Sophie. It's true. George knows it all down to the penny. Since we've mentioned the quarterly meeting a couple times, I'll just let folks know that we do have our regular quarterly meetings the fourth Wednesday of each quarter, and it's coming up on, it's October 26th. 9 a.m. is the Finance Committee meeting, which is open to the public, and 10 a.m. is the start of the regular board meeting. And I think actually we're meeting in person somewhere, maybe, but we'll be streaming it as well. So, all right. Does anybody else have any other comments or questions they'd like to make? Bob. You're muted there, Bob.
Thank you. Sorry. Just a sort of a reminder to ourselves as members of the board, our job is to be skeptical. And I'll tell you, when Delta Thermo was sitting in on our meetings, we were really skeptical. There's no comparison to the kind of communication we're having now with Revere. These guys are highly professional. They put in hours, literally, in coming up with the information they need to decide even whether to consider making the investment. Mike and George have spent time with them, countless hours with them as well. Karen's been involved. They've kept the board up to date. So I'm very confident in the process that's being followed here. It's a careful process. It's a deliberative process. And it's one that at the end of the day will hopefully bear fruit. And I say hopefully because it's not over until we know all of the facts, and we're not going to know all of the facts for a few more weeks. I'd also add that, and we've said this so many times, there's safety in numbers, and the strength of the MRC has been I'll call it loyalty of its members and trust of the members in what the MRC board is trying to accomplish and get done on their behalves. And so I have faith in what we're doing. We're looking at options. We have to, but the hope is that this option will work for all of us. It's a very different situation from what it was when we were negotiating under the umbrella of bondholders who owned the facility. We own it now. It's a very different scenario. and the kind and quality of communication that's resulted because of the MRC's ownership is very different. So I say hang in there with us. This is going to have a good ending for everybody.
Thanks, Bob. Very well stated. Appreciate those comments. Anyone else? Before we sign off this afternoon, this morning? All right, well, it looks like we've completed and taken all the questions and provided the information that folks are looking for. We appreciate your time and participation today. I want to just really give a huge thank you to our board members, but also Mike, who lives and breathes this every day, pretty much almost 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, as well as our consultants, George and John, and thank you to Pat and Nigel. As Bob said, you know, the communication has been excellent, and we really appreciate all the effort that you're putting into it and your consideration of the MRC's concerns and issues. And with that, we will sign off and look forward to some of you folks dialing in a couple weeks for our regular board meeting. And we'll be sending out constant contact updates to keep you apprised.